Good afternoon, everyone. The original story, Greenland gaining summer ice, early ending on the melt season. Wow, that growth continued to record territory. Got to push back the earliest dates for farming by at least 1,000 years. They were sun worshippers also. One of the earliest known cities in Ukraine. Notice how they fortified themselves naturally on 3 sides. A lot of inconsistencies in what the experts are telling us. In this day and age, it's so important to keep your body functioning at optimal performance. And collagen may be the closest thing we get to a real fountain of youth. After all, collagen is the most abundant protein in your body and essentially the glue that holds it all together. When you're middle-aged, you're only producing half of the collagen that you did in your youth. My focus is about digestive health because the change in our diets from foods being unavailable, moving to seasonal availability of foods, and the entire spectrum of availability of foods changing. There's so much more to talk about with the benefits of collagen. You can visit healthwithadapt2030.com to learn more. The link's in the description box below. Starting over here, Greenland's summer melt season looks to be over, almost a full month ahead of schedule. Pulled this one off Electroverse, but also put the links in the description box below of the Danish Meteorological Institute so you can check the daily ice gain totals here on Greenland. So the date of the original story was August 8th, and then following through the 16th, look at that massive spike, all-time ever recorded gains in August. And generally, right in the first week of September, it begins the accumulation period again through the next 7 to 8 months. Regardless if the forecasts were correct on the melting, what should be asked is, what's causing such a massive spike? Because down in the southern hemisphere, we're seeing extreme cold as well. So what is it with all these cold anomalies and rain events across the planet? That should be the question that the corporate media should be asking. And after reading this article, 5,200-year-old grains redate the Trans-Eurasian Crop Exchange will make you shake your head and say, what are we missing in human history timelines? And right in the first couple of paragraphs, they say most people are familiar with the Silk Road out of China, but few people realize that the exchange of ideas, items, goods, technology, foods moved through the mountain valleys of Central Asia and started almost 3 millennia before organized trade networks formed. But wait, you just said there was an organized trade network because people were trading ideas, items. So that may be the first thing going, all right, what type of article is this going to be? The image they included in the article is over to the right. It very much looks like a sun. And then I dug up a few other of the stele or rock art pieces from around the area. And that definitely looks like a sun with the moon inside of it, which leads me to believe that they were very focused also on solar activity and the way that it would affect their society, just like all the ancient cultures do. Zoom this in for you here. You're looking over to the right. I'm curious what the 2 teardrops are connected. A belt, perhaps. A movement through the heavens. A cycle, perhaps. If you have any ideas, leave them in the description box below. As well, this curious piece, it definitely represents a sun with a crescent moon in it, but the wavy lines below, I'm wondering if those are floodwaters somehow started or amplified by solar activity. Researchers have no idea. They just say that this is a human representation. So I'll ask you, okay, the one on the left looks like a human representation. The one on the right does not, but they classify them both as human representations. So what's going on there? And look at the map here of the movement several thousand years before there were established trade routes. And the information that led them to these conclusions are the wheat and the barley that were found between a cave area in Beijing and the same species of wheat and barley grown in Mesopotamia. So they admit also that they have to push the dates back for even farming by at least 1,000 years. So where's the disappeared part of history then? If they lost 1,000 years just in our farming practices, they're off 3,000 years by the trade routes. Any explanation of where the disappeared time has gone to? The map's really interesting because it does show the Fertile Crescent. Those are the areas in Iraq and Syria today. Incredibly dry, but back then it was a verdant walk-through garden. And as you proceed more eastward, you find where it says India civilization. That was Harappa. Again, a cradle, a birth point of human civilization as we know it, along with Babylonia, the Sumerians. And as we cross through the Altai Mountains in the Tarim Basin, that's north of that big, dark, mountainous area of the Himalayan range. When you come on the back side of that to the north there, you come to the Tarim Basin now. It's a super dry desert. Before there were cities, trade routes, caravan routes, just such the thriving amount of culture through there. But what's interesting in the Taishan Mountains and that whole area in the Tarim Basin, the rivers are starting to run again after about 2,500 to 3,000 years in most instances. Just started about 2 years ago, 2017, 18. They noticed that the rivers are now running on a seasonal basis for the meltwaters or flood when they didn't before. Something has definitely changed. And then we go all the way over to Beijing and we get the Neolithic agriculture. How do they connect that? Now, this is strange because we were told that everything was so regional, everybody was hunter-gatherers. They barely could even make fire with whatever means of chipping rocks together. Yet they were able to move tons and tons of grain from far west where you see the Middle East now all the way over into eastern China, what we know today. How's that possible? So yeah, there are thousands of years of missing history between that connection of networks to move just grain. We're not talking about riding a horse. We're talking about moving thousands of pounds of grain in shipments from point A to point B. And look at the Altai Mountains referenced in the article. This is the nugget out of the research here. The ecological setting was slightly warmer and more humid when people lived around this cave 5,200 years ago. I'll let you draw your own conclusion on how it could have been warmer in the past than it is supposedly now. The humidity makes sense with more cosmic rays, but that would be the part of science that needs to be redefined or reestablished on a timeline. As well, digging back into our human past, farmland in Ukraine covers the ancient settlement, Nebelivka. This is one of the earliest known cities on our planet, organized into a city. Now, there were other areas that were inhabited, of course, but in a city surrounding in a circular fashion that's very similar with a grid laid out. This puts it on par with the engineering feats of something in the Sumerian era. They call it a mega structure, and when you're looking at the 500 meter, for those of you in the U.S., 500 meters is 1,500 feet. So from end to end, on the longer section in the oval, that's 6,000 feet. That's more than a mile. And in the width at the widest point, you're talking about 4,500 feet, nearly a mile. This was supposed to be hunter-gatherer time, and they're making cities that are over a mile wide with roads, habitation. See, there's a missing part of history here. You just don't build that big on a superstructure. And notice the perfect chosen place for defense. That river valley there with the cliffs, freshwater source, fertile farmland, they would have had a thriving society. And you look at the current agriculture, if you got a city that's a mile wide plus, people living in there, how much food would you need to grow? You probably need to farm the approximate same size of those fields. So then it takes it to a whole different era. How were they able to get that much farmland under control when they were supposed to be doing everything by hand? Because the domestication of animals to use for plows even hadn't occurred yet. I'm sure somewhere in some private library there's a true historical account of the human development since the end of the Younger Dryas 12,500 years ago. But what we're seeing in these articles, we're not getting it. But we are coming into unprecedented changes. As you can see across the landscape of X, Y, and Z, the world around us has shifted and morphed, and it's going to continue to get stranger as we move through, especially 2021 and 22. Food being the most important thing on the planet to keep a society moving, there's going to be a very constricted amount of that coming up after this harvest season. Perhaps that's why they're making everybody stand out in front of stores waiting in line to get in. They're getting you ready for rationing. I talk more about this on my Patreon channel /Adapt2030. And for my own opinion, we'll probably have until about mid-October to get everything in order. before your life becomes more unrecognizable. Thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of the video, and I'll see you next time.